Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Death of a Nation. Before we start our show, I'd like to say that my wife Paula is here this evening. Thank you, honey. I appreciate it. Apparently, I have to marry someone to get them to come and see this show. But, don't think it's a bad strategy of marketing, because Judge Roy Moore has fucked every man, woman, and child in the state of Alabama, and he's about to become senator. And now, we begin the death of a nation. And don't expect it all to be funny, because it isn't going to be. Episode 1. Just like Star Wars. Episode 1. Fascism and humanity. A nation is not its government. A nation is an idea and a set of principles and values. A government can maim and subdue a nation, but it can never destroy it. A nation is eternal. America existed before the continent of North America was even formed. Murder is a temporary thing. Essences violently are torn apart and slowly return. First as ghosts, and later as free people. My father got sick and died. An audience member who was at my show over the summer or some Saturday night offered me some reasons why people should be denied health care. They didn't take care of themselves. They were lazy. We shouldn't pay for people who don't contribute to the system. He had a very hard-nosed moral tone in his voice as he offered his opinions. He felt certain sick people should feel shame for what they brought upon themselves. You know who I think should feel ashamed? Any fucking animal who would deny medical attention to any human being who needs it. Any human. Whether someone thinks they deserve it or not. The biggest fucking bum in the world should be taken care of when he's sick. No matter how evil or undisciplined he may have been. And certainly, any poor people who have had their lives destroyed by the thieving rich should receive care. Any fucking buddy. When my father was dying, he was in hospice. This was back in 2008 and 2009. He died on President's Day of 2009. His care plan said he would have no invasive treatment, such as radiation, but he'd have all he needed for his comfort. He contracted a urinary tract infection just a little bit before he died, which could be cured easily with an antibiotic. His nurse didn't give it to him. She said with an authority that she had no right to assume. We decided not to. We got my father the fucking antibiotic, but he had to live a few of his last days in discomfort because that bitch couldn't wait for him to die. My father had done nothing wrong by anybody's standards. He would even pass muster with my stern audience member who thinks human beings should be sentenced to death for the gross imperfections of smoking or overeating. People like the audience member believe in two things: markets and punishment. Fuck education. Fuck friendship. Fuck forgiveness. Fuck healthcare. Build another prison and make another judgmental remark. Yet the nurse wanted to shame my father for dying slowly. She had to save some money that could be handed to some rich people who didn't need it. Nothing in her life was more important than pleasing these fucking rich people. The shame is on her. I have struggled to understand what makes people so heartless and cruel. Oh, and they so want to be understood. They really do. Just today, Orrin Hatch was going crazy because he was being called out for being a prick in a Senate committee hearing. I come from poor stock. I always help people. Then why are you supporting this draconian tax legislation? But it's not only the senators. They want to be understood. They want praise for being so good and decent. They're the real Americans. They stand up for the national anthem. They are among the worst people in the world. The standard liberal explanation is that they have suffered and they carry on the abuse. But I no longer buy that. Their personal lousiness is a choice. Everyone has had a tough time putting food on the table. Doesn't become as ugly and cruel as these people. My father, for example, had a very tough life. He was personally abused in fascist schools in Italy, and actually sexually abused. He told me, he didn't say it like he was sexually abused, but he told me when I was like 16 that a priest used to crawl in bed with him. Priests that worked for Mussolini. There's a combination. He did hard labor in an auto body shop for decades, breathing in the toxic materials that ultimately killed him. But he never gave in to the harsh violence and lack of generosity that the audience member and the nurse embrace. He was confused at times, but he never took sadistic joy at the suffering of others. He wasn't ever a rich man by any means, but he never placed even a needed dollar, and he needed them plenty of times, above another person. How these assholes lie to themselves and believe that their fear and jealousy are virtues. They resent the world because of their own material and spiritual failures. They hate the immigrants who came to their towns with nothing and subsequently thrived with hard work and initiative, while they themselves mock the educated on their way to the meth dealer's house. Trump and Mitch McConnell aren't the problems. Orrin Hatch isn't the problem. The audience member and the nurse are the problems. Trump and McConnell just manipulate what already exists in these walking suicides. We have this awful, immoral government because we share this nation with these awful, immoral people. I have no tolerance for what these people are. I was originally going to say for what these people believe, but this piece has nothing to do with ideas and opinions. That drives me nuts. This isn't an opinion. I can't stand what these people are. There's no excuse for it. They have chosen death. I want nothing to do with them until they change. And I do believe in redemption. But not compromise. Not with these people. Not now. Art. Orson Welles, brought low by the world, acknowledging his weight with irony and not apology. His audience remembered him as a handsome leading man in the 1940s and making ironic reference to his wine commercials. The great artist of the 20th century experiencing an unjust shaming. Don't we all? The mediocre hated or reviled him. Welles, performing a brief snippet of Shakespeare's great character, John Falstaff, on the Dean Martin show sometime in the 1960s. Falstaff, the lover of life, the innocent, a person too good for the mendacity and meanness of modernity, as Welles calls him a refugee from the harsh world, a joyful exile, touching people with something better, living by his wits, playing the fool to survive. The mawkish yet well-meaning accompaniment music stops finally, and it's just Welles and Shakespeare. And even the gold diggers knew what they were saying. Welles had just finished his masterful Chimes at Midnight, an underseen and underappreciated film recognized by only some of the cognoscenti of the heart that keep humanity alive in obscure places like film revival houses that struggle to keep their doors open. I tire of the good work of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New Yorker. and even obscure little homemade operations like the Rick blog, which of course doesn't report but reflects. I want something more lasting than the response to the latest outrage and lie. I want something beyond politics. I think the Rick blog does that at times, but I feel something changing and going further. How great Wells' acting was, and how personal and unique his direction. Chimes at midnight. Art is the greatest teacher, and Wells is one of the great masters of the pedagogy. The masks of comedy and tragedy are the same, and the greatest art is a complete reflection of life, and therefore bittersweet. Wells discusses Falstaff, himself, and the world, and demonstrates the joyful difficulty of being fully alive. Nebraska, land of the zombies. I drove to Los Angeles last July. The world changes when you drive over the border from Iowa to Nebraska. Iowa is like Illinois. Reason and insanity live side by side, checks and imbalances. In Nebraska, you get the impression that there are very few buildings and lots of people, or I should say former people. The zombies roam the farmland, searching for human brains to eat, and they must be hungry. Nebraska talk radio has a peculiar charm. The hosts broadcast from places like San Diego, following their How to Lie to Suckers broadcasting manual. The suckers aren't that stupid. They want the lie. They call the shows and praise Trump, saying that his attack on Mika Brzezinski, this was the diversion du jour, the media storm that meant nothing, that was of that moment when I was driving in Nebraska. She supposedly walked into a social affair hosted by Trump when he was president-elect, bleeding. The people that listened to the radio station said, well, this is probably true. Their doubting defense of the orange demagogue evidences that some small speck of living brain tissue still receives blood in their skulls and recognizes that Trump's ugly claim against the millionaire cable news star, raised in an elite family of artists and diplomats, and member of a sophisticated social circle in New York City, is not only cruel, gross, and disgusting, but it is also preposterous. An accusation so ridiculous that it is an insult to the intelligences of the exurban marks that are being lied to. A woman of Brzezinski's background would show up at a major social event last January. This is what Trump is claiming. Hosted by the president-elect, no less. Visibly bleeding from surgery. She's walking in bleeding. Of course, you'd have to be a complete idiot to believe that. Yes, that's what happened in January, and the Queen of England took a shit in the middle of North Avenue Beach last August. The people of Nebraska aren't idiots. They're just dead inside. I stopped at a restaurant where real live farmers eat. I received smiles without mirth, except for a couple of crazy leers that looked like preludes to my demise, a rape murder, lustful hearts on their sleeves. I wasn't flattered. I knew tonight I would be an object of conquest, and tomorrow the aim would be a full-grown sheep. The farmers ate knowingly, as if they were acquainted with the food when it was alive. These are people that know what work is, but not ambition. They know kindness, but not warmth. Are they humans? Or is this an ant farm? They have never had conscious lives. Their destinies have been sacrificed on an altar of obedience. Personal vision for one's future isn't allowed here. They live out their days with a Calvinist austerity. They get nothing now, but will rape 1,000 virgins in heaven. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's the Taliban. The people of Nebraska would destroy the country for just a little attention. Trump tells them what they want to hear, and that's all they need. They could ask for the attention. They could trust their dreams instead of simply doing as they are told. Some of them do, but they move away. So many have people wandering in this land of nothing. Evil masterminds won't destroy the world. The world will die from a lack of confidence. The music man of the famous play changed his heart and loved Marion the librarian in Iowa. If the story took place in Nebraska, she would know he was full of shit, let him fuck her so she could feel something, and then commit suicide. Triviality. I demand triviality. Laugh at the kings or they'll make you cry. Bad jokes, real bad jokes, because I ain't afraid of no ghost. Trump associates mob names. Sarah, the Walmart greeter Huckabee Sanders. Kellyanne, the witch Conway. Mike, the Reverend Pence. Rick, the dunce Perry. Wilbur, adult diapers Ross. Jefferson, Beauregard Sessions. Steve, the skimmer Mnuchin. Rex, the mute Tillerson. Betsy, the ditz DeVos. Reince, Luftwaffe Priebus. H.R. Warbucks McMaster. Steve, the Slob Bannon. Mike, Banana Boat Pompeo. Mike Pompeo. Daylight come and I wanna go home. Ryan the Zinky. Sonny the Roaster Purdue. Linda the Wrestler McMahon. Ben Sleepy Carson. John Machine Gun Kelly. Alexander who? Acosta. James I'm in charge Mattis. Elaine Ural Squeeze. Chow. Nikki Jackie Hurl Haley. Jared the Realtor Kushner. Ivanka the Retailer Trump. Melania the Hostage Trump. Eric Menendez Trump. Donald Kusay Trump Jr. Paul Conrad Manafort. Mike the Flipper Flynn. Corey Punchy Lewandowski. Rudy the Lisp Giuliani. Chris the Eater Christie. Newt the Catholic Gingrich. Paul the Munster Ryan. Mitch the Sneak McConnell. Sean Melissa Spicer. Bill the Forgotten O'Reilly. Roger the Corpse Ailes. And of course, Donald the Defendant Trump. A fish stinks from its head. Have a good gravy this Sunday. These are taken from a publication that I favor. It's called the Rick Blog. It's written by me. And these are the Rick Blog presidential rankings from worst to first. First, just a few statements before we begin. A fascist by any name still smells the same. Hitler and Mussolini weren't innovators. A long tradition. A human is a joy forever. America is a changing place that somehow always stays the same. Ghosts of America, past, present, and future. William Henry Harrison, incomplete, dead in a month. Number 44, worst, Donald Trump, I've seen enough. You can't beat a fascist coup. 43, James Buchanan, watched the onset of the Civil War with his finger up his ass. 42, Franklin Pierce, drunk, useless ancestor of George W. Bush, pro-slavery from New England. 41, Millard Fillmore, early in the lineup of appeasers of the Confederacy. 40, George W. Bush, stole his election, led us into war, stole the treasury for corporate cronies, lost an American city when irresponsive to a natural disaster, let unregulated bankers ruin the economy and ordinary people's lives. 39, Herbert Hoover, a Republican responds to the economic and humanitarian disaster of the Great Depression in a typical Republican way. Watch the money while the people die. 38, Warren G. Harding, lazy, allowed corruption, no foresight. 37, Calvin Coolidge, clueless Republican who let things go to hell, all business with no sense of the needs of the whole society. 36, Richard Nixon, criminal, attacked our democracy, executed an immoral war, fairly progressive in domestic policy. 35, Rutherford B. Hayes, got the White House in a crooked deal, stopped all racial progress in the South after the Civil War. 34, George H.W. Bush, led avoidable Iraq War I, introduced vicious politics of personal destruction in his campaign. 33, Ronald Reagan, ignited the far-right transformation in our politics and culture that's been so destructive in America for the past 37 years. 32, John Tyler, 1847er, pig. 31, William McKinley, the first major imperialist, led Vietnam-type wars. 30, James K. Polk, led a immoral Mexican war, stole half the country for us. He makes discrimination against Mexicans ironic on top of everything else. It actually is their country. 29, Zachary Taylor, inconsequential hero of immoral Mexican war. 28, Martin Van Buren, limited power, too small for the job. 27, Andrew Johnson, didn't matter. He didn't matter. Radical Republicans in Congress ran things after the Civil War, way over his head responding to chaos. After the Lincoln assassination, only a Lincoln can meet that moment. Certainly not a drunk with Southern sympathies, avoided conviction in an improper impeachment. 26, Chester Arthur and Benjamin Harrison, a tie. Forgettable presidents from a time of lowest presidential influence. 24 and 23, Grover Cleveland, competent administrator. He served 2 terms, didn't further justice, 2 separate terms. 22, Andrew Jackson, democratized institutions, improved national sense, violent racist. 21, Gerald R. Ford, pardon me. 20, Ulysses S. Grant, underrated, not fully competent, corrupt administration, but an advocate for equality and justice. 19, William Howard Taft, professional, lousy leader. 18, Bill Clinton, conservative Democrat. 17, James Garfield, assassinated, unfulfilled potential. 16, John Kennedy, ditto. 15, Woodrow Wilson, progressive, internationalist, bad on the Bill of Rights, racist. 14, Harry Truman, built Cold War foreign policy for better and worse, progressive. 13, Jimmy Carter, very underrated, ineffective politically, highest personal character of any president with the possible exception of John Quincy Adams, right on most issues. His failures may have been more failures of the American people who weren't good enough for his leadership at the time. 12, Barack Obama, aggressive for his time, progressive for his time, first African-American president. 11, Dwight Eisenhower, hero of World War II, peace and prosperity, warned of the military-industrial complex. 10, Lyndon Johnson, would be one of our greatest presidents if not for the Vietnam War. That's a big if. 9, Theodore Roosevelt, imperialist, but also defined early the progressive state, expanded the presidency, mostly for the public good. 8, John Quincy Adams, high character, a lonely voice against slavery in his post-presidency in the 1830s. 7, James Monroe, brought permanency and stability to the nation. 6, James Madison, the Constitution. 5, John Adams, started everything. 4, Thomas Jefferson, owned slaves, a horror. Everything else was greatness. 3, George Washington, a great leader, also owned slaves, a horror. 1, a tie. Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt. What these two men fought for exemplify what the best of America is. The fascist next door. My friend has known a guy for 30 years. He considered the guy a friend and mentor. I knew the guy a little. I thought the guy was an asshole. My friend saw the guy and had a drink with him. The guy said that he voted for Trump. He leaned over his beer and whispered, "Those people can't govern themselves. We have to do it." My friend was stunned. He knew the guy, the regular guy. He knew the guy forever. And he never said anything indicating his racism and fascism before. I wasn't surprised at all. I saw the guy's fascist tendencies right away. He tried to push me around, and I told him to go fuck himself. This shithead taught college ethics for 30 years. Ethics! He taught it at a very diverse university with a primarily immigrant population and people of color. This subversively fascist mentality interacted with these students for decades. He was celebrated by the school when he retired, and he hated the student body. My friend said he didn't want to see this fascist asshole anymore. He felt dirty in his presence. We have scum around us. Scum with degrees and decent jobs and good professional reputations. I am proud of my friend. He had a seemingly close relationship with this Nazi trash for years, and he walked away from it when he saw a supposed friendship was an illusion. My friend said, "A vote for Trump tells you what kind of person someone is. It's the great divider." Yes, it is true. A vote for Trump is an indication of a fundamental lack of decency. It isn't simply a political position. It is something disgusting and horrible. The first step in dealing with the fascists is what my friend did. A Trump vote is grounds for divorce from any human relationship that you have with the fascist. What's the second step? I am going to go to Jesus for an answer. Jesus, who isn't responsible for the creeps who often claim to follow him, while their actions and lives proceed uninfluenced by any of his teachings. And Jesus, who would never require you to pledge allegiance to a church with his name on it, or argue about and in favor of his divinity, before allowing you to benefit from his wisdom and love. Luke chapter 12, verses 49 through 56. Jesus causes division. I have come to set the world on fire, and I wish it were already burning. So I have a terrible baptism of suffering ahead of me, and I am under a heavy burden until it is accomplished. Do you think I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I have come to divide people against each other. From now on, families will be split apart. 3 in favor of me and 2 against, or 2 in favor of me and 3 against. Father will be divided against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Did we lose Tommy?
Yeah.
The other time somebody else was calling?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Hey. Keep going, I'm sorry.
That's fine, that's fine.
I don't know what happened.
Sure, that's all right. Father will be divided against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Then Jesus turned to the crowd and said, when you see clouds beginning to form in the west, you say, here comes a shower. And you are right. When the south wind blows, you say, today will be a scorcher. And it is. You fools. You know how to interpret the weather signs of the earth and sky. But you don't know how to interpret the present times. Now is the time to end our unconscious compromises and to create a world of justice and love. This is me talking now, not Jesus. Our previously subversive oppressors have come out of hiding and revealed who and what they really are. And who and what they really are is really unacceptable. They must change or live the rest of their lives in shame as pariahs. What is happening is not mere resistance against Trump. It is a revolution demanding decency and justice. Okay, now baby boomers, please tell young people you love. Alt-right means Nazi, and Nazi means scum. They don't know. This piece, which was originally a blog post, was discovered by some young apprentice Nazis last week. Over 70 of them read the piece. And several trolled me online. Heil Hitler! You have succumbed to Jewish propaganda, you old dumb fuck. You are on the wrong side of World War II. You idiots are losing our white nation. If you were born... Hi, baby. Please just come in. We're doing a run-through. So, we'll say hello later. Got to keep working here. Okay. If you were born in the 1940s or the 1950s, I'd like to ask you to do a positive thing. If you were born in the late 1940s or 1950s, I'd like to ask you to do a patriotic act this Thanksgiving and beyond. Tell young people what Nazis are. I was speaking to a student of mine, a very bright and nice young guy, about 25 years old or so. Well, I wasn't really speaking to him. I was caught up in one of my standard rants, where I explained why I believe that voting for Trump was an immoral act, independent of political beliefs, or social, economic, or educational attainment. I'm going to go back to the thing I was playing. When I got to the part about the unforgivable moral outrage of the despicable Trump campaign, and how I'll never forget how that ugly campaign and the permanent harm it inflicted upon our country, I mentioned in passing the Nazi Steve Bannon. And the young man earnestly attempted to correct me. Oh no, Bannon's no Nazi. Yes, he is. He used to head up Breitbart, and he does so again now. That's the site that publishes that alt-right crap. Breitbart isn't so bad. The alt-right is just a source of a certain kind I mentioned in passing the Nazi Steve Bannon. The young man earnestly attempted to correct me. Oh no, Bannon's no Nazi. Yes, he is. He used to head up Breitbart, and he does so again now. That door's not all the way closed.
I'm sorry.
Well, please, honey, just let me do. You can't talk right now. I'm sorry.
I'm not talking.
It should be good.
Okay. Yes, he is. He used to head up Breitbart, and he does so again now. That site that publishes all the alt-right crap. Oh, Breitbart isn't too bad. The alt-right is just a source of a certain kind of conservative opinion. It's good to get all those political points of view out. I then told my young friend that my repulsion to the alt-right was generational. He looked at me with a very sincere curiosity. One thing I've learned on this teaching gig is that young people really want to listen to us. We have something that they didn't have. The wisdom of our parents and the wisdom of our parents' generation. I was born in 1955. One of the first things that I remember looking at was a photo of my father in his World War II United States Army dress uniform. Like all little boys, I looked up to my dad, and one thing that I knew about him very early on was that he was honorably discharged from the United States war effort against Hitler. He used to tell funny stories depicting himself as a coward, figuring out ways to avoid combat. But they were just funny stories. He showed up for his country, and he was an immigrant that came to the U.S. when he was 17 and was drafted 2 years later. He gave 4 years of his young life to participate in the huge collective fight against Hitler. He was in the Ordnance Corps and spent the war far behind enemy lines. My father wasn't called upon to be particularly heroic. He had those funny war stories. No tales of tragedy or glory, but he was decent. That was the impression that I got of my dad, fighting Hitler with those millions of other guys. He was a good man. He stood on the right side of things. It felt good to know that my dad was good. So, it's kind of in my DNA to see that Nazism is not in the equation of human goodness. My father introduced me to movies and TV. He loves sports and the shows. That's TV shows and movies. When you're born in 1955, you watch a lot of movies and TV. You see a lot of images of Nazis as bad guys. Early on, it was action flicks like The Great Escape. But a little later, it was serious message pictures like Judgment at Nuremberg. That particular movie is probably the first place that I heard about the Holocaust. As I got a little older, Mel Brooks taught me a lot about Nazis. I fell in love with his movies. Hilarious. I got the Defiance, Mel Brooks lampooning Nazis, and show business in The Producers. Jewish people suffered a particular brutality at the hands of the Nazis, and Brooks' movies hilariously showed that they weren't going to let it ruin the rest of their lives. I admired Mel Brooks' bravery and refusal to accept bitterness. His work made a huge impression on me. They were not going to allow it to ruin the rest of their lives. When I was growing up, Nazis were deserved social outcasts. I told my student an anecdote I've written here before. I was raised in Rochester, New York. There was a rundown area of town where prostitutes walked the streets. Every town has at least one neighborhood like this. And pushers push drugs. And Nazi motorcycle gangs hung out in illegal after-hour clubs. Nobody from my middle-class suburb wanted anything to do with any of those people. There was a guy who lived across the street from us. He was a big shot in the local mafia. Everyone looked down on that guy. He didn't want anything to do with the Nazis. The word pariah could have been coined for these losers. You'd have to have a screw loose to want to have anything to do with a Nazi. There was a TV show that was on very late at night in the early 1970s, the Joe Pyne Show. Joe Pyne was a kind of a forerunner of the kind of agitated, confrontational talk that we get out of a lot of the media today. He was for the Vietnam War and generally conservative on most issues. But he also was a big booster of labor unions. He was seriously wounded while he was in the Marines in World War II, and after the war, he lost part of his leg to a rare form of cancer. Pyne had something on his show that was called The Doc. Extremists of all kinds would appear in this kind of witness stand in the middle of the studio audience, where they literally stood as if they were waiting for a verdict to be rendered upon them. They would offer crackpot views, and Pyne would verbally attack them from an elevated desk on a stage 10 yards away. Pyne often had Nazis on the show. The Nazis were booed like World Wrestling Federation villains. I had the opportunity to hear Nazis expound their ridiculous, crazy, ugly, disgusting viewpoints on the Joe Pyne Show. And to hear a World War II veteran eviscerate those viewpoints and the persons that put them forward. Joe Pyne, who was a sensationalist and far from admirable in many ways. He was kind of a disc jockey who got out of control. But he helped teach me that Nazism was evil and that its proponents had something seriously, seriously wrong with them. Nazis are weird people with sick psychological compulsions. Perverts! Joe Pyne's sideshow, Undesirables, had the same views of white nationalism and racial superiority that the alt-right movement does today. The individuals of the alt-right movement have the same twisted, sicko tendencies as American Nazis of the 1970s. Today, however, this trash philosophy and deviant Nazi personality are just part of the world of interesting ideas and minor celebrities for young people to try out online. We have to let these kids know what we think of Nazism and Nazis. We have to tell them our stories of post-war Nazi sightings. We have to tell them more stories in general. Kids really like us. They like us a lot more than Breitbart. They only read Breitbart and other shit like that because they're searching for us. We have to teach them how to be Americans and just how to be men and women the way our parents and their generation taught us. Wisdom is passed down, and we need to pass it down right now. It's an emergency. The young are hungry to connect with us. We have something they never had. The greatest generation raised us. Our national and personal histories are so important right now. The World War II generation is, of course, almost all gone. We have to teach what they taught us, or we will have to live the lessons of World War II all over again, or our kids will. Only this time, America will star in the role of Nazi Germany. And Breitbart and Bannon and Trump will steal young people and manipulate them to be in service of all sorts of perversions, largely because we didn't sit down and talk with our young adult children. Our descendants are begging to spend time with us. The world dies slowly. The world is being murdered slowly. The apocalypse will not be executed in a sudden rain of nuclear bombs. The world is a terminal cancer case in hospice. Some well-meaning people attempt to keep it comfortable, mostly with sense-numbing drugs. But each day, mankind grows weaker. We grow accustomed to the waning of life until we forget that it's happening. We go about our daily lives, enjoy a movie and a nice meal at an inexpensive restaurant, everyday stuff. We check in on the world regularly, bring it warmth and affection, protect it from everyday indignities as much as we can, and then we go home. We even begin to believe things will always proceed in this sad and pleasant way. Then one day, without any fanfare or warning, the world will slip away and there will be only darkness. Nothing will matter. No one will be left to remember. We chose to die. The world takes shallow breaths while drowsy on a morphine drip. Everyone is carving out a niche. It's a very good business. And as everyone carves, the world bleeds to death. The diagnosis is bigger than any individual. The only reasons that I ever worked in any job was either to make a living and survive, or because I loved what I was doing. I sometimes felt conflicted or ashamed about not pursuing success more aggressively, but I couldn't do it. Something inside me stopped me from doing so. Now I know why. I sense something. The pursuit of success is killing the world. The world is pure in its essence and self-regulating. But mankind is dying of narcissism. We can't place our attention and resources in services of the necessities of maintaining life because we are addicted to self-aggrandizement. There is plenty of everything we need, but we hoard and withhold it from the rest of ourselves in an attempt to prove that we, the individuals, are special and better than the rest of ourselves. Purity is mocked as being unrealistic, but reality is pure. The so-called world is an insane hallucination. The acceptance of the success of the few is the murder-suicide of the many. The world's salvation lies in a mass spiritual transformation that seems impossible. But who knows? Sometimes people do the right thing when they are facing extinction. But will that happen when Armageddon is occurring so slowly that it is perceptible to only a few? The Holocaust of the 1940s was carried out in death factories in Germany. Today's Holocaust is being carried out by banks in New York. Industrialization has been replaced by financial instruments. The horrors of our time aren't as crude as gas chambers. They are more subtle, like poor schools and the denial of good food, clean water, and accessible health care. But they are just as lethal. Modern Holocaust deniers refuse to acknowledge how bad things are. Our petty concerns with our own successes and failures is our way of denying the current Holocaust. Hope, get over yourself and be yourself, and hope others follow your example. Hope!
And then just
can you
stay
say that?
focused, I think, on the audience.